Devil Tower by Starfall Imagination. Genre, drama/fantasy. Words, 146692. Rating, M. Status, complete. Summary, in the fantasy world of Grimnar, a dark tower rises from the ground, reaching the skies. Its doors open with the promise of a wish to the first person to reach the top. And as people flock to the tower and struggle to climb, the world outside it begins to fall apart. Following multiple protagonists, many may come to realize the dangers in trusting even their closest friends. Devil Tower. Prologue. What do you desire most in this world?
I wish to be a god.
Your wish is granted. From out of the ground it rose up in complete silence, the Dark Tower, so it was called then at first. It grew like nothing ever before, the ground did not quake, the winds did not howl at its coming, it simply emerged in the dead of night, reaching high above the clouds, perhaps even to the stars themselves. The tower rose in the center of the known world, inside the borders of the Evercane Kingdom, the heart of Grimnar. King Alden sent out his men to scout the tower. Up close the knights found the tower looked like a dark grey stone but was smooth to the touch, and even though winter was upon them, the touch of the tower didn't feel cold, nor did it feel warm. Stranger still, the tower, despite its closer appearance, was smooth to the touch, smoother than any gems the captain ever touched before in his life. Around the tower was nothing, save for single massive double doors that had an ornate demonic creature engraved over a vast of the surface. Because of the creature on the door, the knights called it the Devil Tower, a name which stuck to many people of the region and the kingdom of Evercane. Any attempts to open the doors were futile, and the knights returned to their king empty-handed. The first rays of the morning sun shined down through window into the morning keep. The light slowly hovered over Jezebel's face as her golden hair glistened. Thrain, who was already awake, lay across from her smiling at his wife's sleeping beauty in the first moments of morning. Jezebel was like a gift to him from the light goddess ARandomAudiobookAppeared. Slowly Jezebel opened her eyes to see her lover staring at her, his eyes a deep green, his hair dark and reaching to his neck. Thrain moved in for a kiss and Jezebel complied. He kissed her a few more times and she giggled lightly. Thrain smiled and said, "It's a beautiful morning this day, spring is coming up fast." Jezebel climbed out of bed and grabbed her winter coat off of the coat racket. She wrapped it around her, the wolf pelts sewn through it kept her warm and felt good against her bare skin, as she walked to the window looking out over the Queen's garden. The snow was mostly gone, Thrain was right, spring was coming upon them fast and soon those beautiful flowers would return in bloom. Thrain joined his lover's side by the window and wrapped his arm around her shoulder. She looked over to him, he was not wearing any clothing despite the cold. She gazed down his naked body, her eyes settling upon his battle scars, though few and far between, she hated the sight of them. Thrain however liked his scars and wore them like badges of honor.
"How are you not cold?"
Jezebel asked.
"Because you are here to warm me up,"
Thrain answered. Jezebel opened her coat to him and gestured him to join her in its protective warmth. Thrain smiled and placed a hand on her belly. It was starting to swell, she was 2 months pregnant now. Thrain kissed her then turned to spark the logs in the fireplace. Only in winter was a fire ever needed to warm up the keep. The morning keep was a special wedding present to Thrain from King Alden. It took nearly a year to build, but when it was complete it was so beautiful and had a special spot that would always catch the morning sun from that eastern window, hence its name. The keep also had some magic forged into it during its construction so that even the coldest winter would not freeze Thrain or his wife, nor the hottest summers roast them. With the fire lit, he returned to his wife's side and began to kiss her more until a knocking came at the door. Irritated at the interruption, Thrain called out for the person knocking at his door to come inside. The door opened up and on the other side was Garin, Thrain's young squire. Garin was 17 of age and very promising with a blade. Most other knights would have knighted Garin by now, if not sooner given his talents, but Thrain believed he had a little bit more maturing to do before becoming a knight.
"I am sorry to interrupt, Sir Thrain, but there has been a council meeting called and your presence is requested of the king immediately," Garin said. Thrain did his best to hide it, but he was concerned about this, a council meeting this early could never be a good sign. He glanced back to his wife and flashed a smile of reassurance to her and then turned back to his squire. Garin was wearing his unique squire uniform with Thrain's sigil, a soaring eagle, embroidered onto the surcoat.
It was a good sign his squire was not fully garbed in armor, and Garen would wear his squire uniform almost every day even when he would not see Thrain for some time. The boy was proud to be his squire.
"Alright, wait outside for a minute while I dress,"
Thrain said. A few minutes later Thrain came out of the keep dressed in long robes of deep blues and purple. A brown soaring eagle was embroidered onto the chest of his robes, and on the back was embroidered a golden pair of angelic wings folding inward and crossing over each other, the sigil of the Evercane kingdom. Those were his commander robes. He wore them whenever there was a council meeting, or with his armor, of same color and design. Thrain was proud of those robes. Only the greatest commanders of the kingdom were awarded them, and he was, in fact, the greatest commander of the kingdom.
"Anything you can tell me beforehand about this meeting?"
Thrain asked, walking at a brisk pace. Garen moved swiftly to keep up with him.
"None, sir," he answered. "Lord Tarbeck dispatched his messenger at the king's request immediately." "And why is it that you call upon me like some lonely messenger? Surely Lord Tarbeck has others at his disposal to send the same message and not waste a squire's time."
Thrain asked, sounding annoyed.
"He does, sir, but it seems all his other messengers are in fact dispatched as well on other duties. Something big must be happening. As it were, I told the messenger to go find the others and that I would proxy the message to you myself. The poor lad has to run around the entire castle with that message to the other council members, and your keep is furthest out of the way from them."
Thrain remained in silence for a better part of their walk, thinking to himself.
"Were we the first ones the messenger was sent to fetch?"
he asked. Garen hesitated briefly to answer. He could hear the subtle worry in Thrain's voice as he asked the question. He did not wish to worry him further by answering truthfully, but he knew better than to lie to Thrain. The noble knight seemed to have an incredible gift to always detect a lie from someone, as if magic were guiding the truth to his ears. Perhaps it was.
"I believe so, sir,"
Garen answered.
"The only reason the king would have to urgently summon me and you this early is for war. Either a neighboring kingdom attacked our borders or they have a battalion, perhaps even their entire army, marching to attack us right now. Regardless, this does not feel good to me. Let us make haste."
The council room was designed originally as a safe room for the royal children to hide in case the kingdom and the castle ever fell to enemy hands. Known only to a select few, this safe room also has a secret passage tunnel which stretched northwest all the way to Lemmias, Portugal. Hidden away in under the castle's library, King Alden decided to clean it up and furnish it to serve as the new council room. The old council room was much nicer in comparison. But in more recent years, too much information from the council meetings has leaked out to the ears of Evercane's enemies. It wouldn't be too hard for a spy to listen in on those meetings before. Or perhaps a guard, too drunk to stand, may have overheard a thing or two and was stupidly repeating what he heard to the pretty whore in some brothel who knows just how to loosen a man's tongue. Regardless of the reasons before, if any information from the meetings were to leak out to his enemies, the king would have a much smaller list of suspects to interrogate. The two guards standing before the library nodded at Thrain and Garen and stepped aside for them. They entered the library and found the secret passage to the council room, under the only portion of the rug that came up with ease in the east corner, already opened. The passageway lit up too. The new council room was a round room with simple stone walls and torches lining around them and the narrow passage before it. In the room center sat a large round table with 8 chairs. It was always cold down there, come summer or winter. In one chair sat Alden, the 12th king of Evercane. Alden was an average-looking man, a bit tall and a little slender. He had no facial hair and kept his light brown hair cut very short. Next to him sat Lord Tarbeck. He was a little shorter than average and slightly plump. What little hair he had on top of his head was very short and receding. He had a thin dark mustache that seemed incapable of growing thicker or connecting with any other facial hair he might grow. Thrain and Garen stopped at the edge of the table and bowed their head before King Alden. In response, Alden tossed his hand through the air and said,
"Bah, there is no need for formalities as such down here, both of you. Now raise your heads and sit."
The two found their seats on opposite ends of the table overlooking the door. Thrain then turned to the king and asked,
"My king, may I ask what this meeting is about for being called in so early?"
Alden muttered something incoherent under his breath and said,
"It's just Alden down here, please. And we shall discuss what this meeting is about when all the members arrive."
He paused a moment in short thought, then concluded,
"It's not a meeting about war though, so on that you may at least relax."
The next person to arrive was the Grand Magister Cambron. He was an older man with white frizzy hair and a thin grey beard. He wore a long plain dark green robe and slippers of the same color. It seemed as though he hadn't bothered dressing and decided to wear his bedclothes.
With him was Magister Vera, a woman in her late 30s with brown hair tied hastily into a bun. She wore more appropriate attire than Cameron, but still was a little messy in her haste. Without all her makeup, she was very plain and mildly unattractive. Vera was first in line of succession to the title of Grand Magister for the kingdom whenever Cameron passed away. This will be her 4th time sitting at a council meeting. The next to arrive was the kingdom's financial keeper, a brilliant young man named Brian. The final person to appear was Prince Rugal, the first and only son of Alden and heir to the Evercane kingdom. He was a handsome young man, with light brown hair, just as his father's, blue eyes like the sea and a strong physical build. The prince also had some charisma to his character, which was good for a future ruler. He wore his full body armor, save for the helm, with sword strapped to the belt included, and even had his gauntlets on. This would at least explain why he was so late. When he took his seat next to his father's side, the council meeting had begun at last. King Alden was silent for a time, trying to decide where to start.
To begin, all of you are aware of that mysterious dark tower that sprouted up south of here, seemingly overnight, correct?
King Alden asked.
How can we not? The ugly thing can be seen all the way from the Drogov Mountains, I bet,
Vera said condescending, while everyone else sufficed a simple, yes. Alden ignored her attitude and continued,
well, it seems that this devil tower is a far greater threat than we realized before.
Prince Rugal placed his hand on his sword, as if expecting something to burst through the thick door at any moment, and asked,
what kind of threat, father? I received many reports from the southern farmlands closest to the tower that their crops are simply dying out entirely. They also claim that the lands around the tower seem to be dying as well, almost eroding if you would. Now, with it being winter still, I thought very little of it. But had Lord Tarbeck sent a scout out to the tower to see for himself these dying lands?
Alden turned to Lord Tarbeck and gestured for him to continue in his place. Tarbeck cleared his throat and said,
my scout rode tirelessly for 3 days until reaching the tower base. Around about a 2-mile radius, he found that not only was there not a hint of snow, but the grass which should have been green and luscious was instead a dingy brown. And within 100 feet of the tower base itself, the once hard ground of grass and dirt was nothing more than a soggy swamp ground. His horse had trouble just walking through it. Next he went to the farmlands, and the ones closest to the tower can barely keep enough crops alive to feed their own families in the next coming harvest. I'm dismayed to say that the southern farm harvest will be very poor this coming season.
Everyone sat in silence, thinking this news over and for a long time. Until Grand Magister Cameron spoke out the conclusion that the king and Lord Tarbeck must have discovered some time after they got this news.
The ground around the tower seems to be dying off, but at a slow pace,
he said.
As I see it now, the southern farmers will simply have to relocate north a few miles to continue their work. That shouldn't be an issue, however the real issue is what may come.
Cameron was then silent for many long moments until Garin inquired,
Grand Magister, do you wish to elaborate a little more upon that?
Cameron clicked his tongue then said,
yes, sorry. The problem I fear to come from this is if the dying lands from around the tower continue to spread out. As it stands now, it's about 1 mile of dead lands per a month that the tower stands.
Prince Rugal rose to his feet and cried out,
well then the answer is simple, we must destroy the tower. I agree with the prince on this,
Thrain said.
This dark tower is obviously a bad omen and a threat to our kingdom. With the goddess ARandomAudiobook by our side, we shall smite this dark force and destroy it.
King Alden looked around the table at the council members and asked,
then is everyone agreed on this?
The answer of them all was yes. And so later that very day King Alden dispatched Thrain, Cameron, and many others to destroy the tower from its base. Thrain, Garin, Prince Rugal, Grand Magister Cameron and a dozen knights rode out to destroy the tower. Cameron had a small caravan drawn with 4 horses. Inside it, he claimed, were numerous potions and brews that ought to do the trick, if raw power didn't work so well. The uneventful trip took them over a week at their pace. They had to slow down marginally so that Cameron and his caravan wouldn't get left behind. At the tower, they discovered it was as Lord Tarbeck's scout had claimed, dead grass for a couple miles out, and closest to the tower the ground was like a swamp. The enormous doors with the strange devil on them still remained closed. The doors happened to be facing south, aimed at the red scorched lands, and Mount d'Enfer, the same name of the ancient legendary fire demon. Looking at the door and thinking of its opposition, Thrain called to Magister Cameron and asked,
this door is facing out towards the red scorched lands. Does that devil on it look familiar to you?
Cameron studied the door for a minute then said,
yes, now that you mention it. It looks just like the illustrations of the fire devil d'Enfer. You know, Sir Thrain, some people believe that after the light goddess ARandomAudiobook defeated the fire devil d'Enfer, that she spread out his magic as a gift to many magi potent humans. And you believe this tale?
Thrain asked.
I do indeed,
answered Cameron.
In fact, nearly every day I thank our light goddess with prayer and try to remember carefully where this destructive and powerful magic comes from.
Thinking back to a time long ago, Thrain said,
not all magisters, or magi if you prefer, are sorcerers wielding fire and lightning. Some deal with sheer force to move objects, others are more in tune with nature and can grow a tree from a seed in a mere hour. And the worst of them all I hear are ones who craft and manipulate the hearts and minds of the weak-willed.
Yes, acknowledged Cameron.
There are indeed a great many number of magi out in this world, all with their own particular and unique talents.
He sighed, then half cursed.
If only one of them could discover a cure to this damned aging.
Thrain smiled lightly to Cameron and strode his horse along to catch up with the others on the far southeast side of the tower. He didn't get far before Cameron called out to him with a question.
Do you pray, Sir Thrain?
Thrain stopped a moment and thought about his answer. Then he said,
yes, I do in fact pray. What for, if I may inquire further? I pray after each battle or duel that I survive through. I pray to ARandomAudiobook to take the souls of both my fallen comrades and slain enemies to her kingdom of light. I cannot say I have ever met a man before you that would pray for his enemies, except perhaps their deaths. All my enemies died fighting for what they believed in, as would I and my comrades. The only real difference between us is that we believed in different sides of the war. And by the way, dying of old age isn't a curse, it is a blessing. Too many have died at a very young age, male or female. Whether it be battle, illness, or other worse fates, so you should count your blessings, Cameron, and not curse them.
With that, Thrain was off again, Cameron following behind him. Further on the eastern side of the tower base, the knights stood in waiting for Thrain, armed with spiked hammers typically meant for destroying large boulders in swift fashion. They had placed some large flat wooden boards down on the swamp-like ground to give themselves a better foothold for the task at hand. Thrain gave the order, and away they swung the hammers over their heads with all their might. The loud sounds of metal clanging together erupted as the hammers hit the tower, many of the spiked hammer ends completely chipped off, others broken into smaller pieces, and even a couple hammers shattered apart entirely, knocking those knights wielding them on their backs. Rugal quickly stepped forth, drawing his blade from his belt.
Move aside,
he commanded. The knights parted out of his way, and he hastened his steps and swung his sword in a strong diagonal arc, like he was hacking at an enemy. The blade smacked hard against the tower and threatened to push Rugal back, like what happened to the couple knights, but he held strong, and all that anyone could hear was the loud ring of the steel as it vibrated rapidly. With not even a visible scratch on the tower, Rugal shouted in rage and started swinging his sword at it again and again, one meaningless strike after the other. He kept going until Thrain grabbed his wrist, stopping him. Rugal flashed a look of anger at him, but Thrain ignored it and pulled the blade up to eye level to examine it.
We will have to get this repaired back at the castle,
Thrain said. The prince looked along the blade and saw numerous small bits chipped off of it. Garen came up to them too and examined the blade alongside them.
What kind of stone or metal can do this much damage to a mithril blade?
Garen asked.
I have only ever seen a mithril blade damaged by another blade made of adamantite, an even rarer and stronger metal than mithril,
Thrain said.
But the damage was nowhere near that extensive. I am afraid that no man-made weapon will be able to damage this cursed tower.
Rugal sheathed his sword and walked away from the tower with Garen, muttering some curses under his breath.
Magister Cameron, you're our last and best hope. Whenever you're ready, you have my permission to unleash your magic,
Thrain said. He called for all the knights to back up far from the tower base. Cameron made sure to get as close to the tower as he could while still standing on the wooden boards. For a moment the elder magi was silent in concentration, unmoving, almost lifeless. Then without warning he thrust his hands out in front of him and a massive stream of scarlet fire erupted from his palms and hit the tower. A high-pitched screeching noise came off from the flames as they were so intense. The stream of fire kept up for several seconds as the tower tried to repel it. The flames pushed back in all directions but were still close to the base of the tower. Everyone could feel the immense heat even as far back as they were. Lucky for them, Thrain told them to take a good distance, if not some of them may have even been burned. After near a full minute of the fire stream, Cameron stopped and bent to one knee in exhaustion. Thrain and Rugal rushed over to check if he was all right. He was out of breath and covered in sweat but was otherwise fine. Rugal then moved to check the tower. He noticed no visible signs of damage to it. Then he removed his gauntlet and dropped it to touch the tower with his bare hand. After running his naked hand over the tower surface, he punched it in rage and screamed,
"No! Fucking fuck!"
Garen came up to the prince and asked,
"What's wrong?"
Rugal punched the tower again in rage and turned to his friend saying,
"It's not even hot, or hell a little warmer than before."
He turned and shouted to the sky,
"This fucking tower will be the end of my entire kingdom."
No one said anything more for a short time while the prince picked up his gauntlet and turned away from the tower. As he passed by Cambron, the magister placed a hand on his shoulder and said,
"Don't worry, I have a few more tricks up my sleeve yet. My caravan is full of alchemy potions to bring this thing down. Of course I had hoped that my fire stream would do the trick, but I always come prepared."
Cambron and Thrain then walked to his caravan and Thrain helped him pull out numerous bottles filled with mysterious alchemy potions. First he tried a lime green liquid that sizzled and smoked when it touched the tower but ran down in harmlessly. He then moved on to another potion, then another and another after that. The other knights had already started a fire by then and Rugal and Garin had joined them around it and started to eat. After a few hours of trying various potions, and taking notes afterwards, Cambron and Thrain joined them around the fire and ate. The two were silent for their meals, which no one there knew Grand Magister Cambron too well, but for Thrain it was a little unusual. If dismay had befallen the first night at all today, then that was the only sign he showed of it. When they finished, the two were back at it again. They finished when the sun was near set and still the tower remained, apparently unscathed. The knights had already pitched the tents and Thrain and Cambron had returned to the fire for supper. All the other men ate save for Rugal and Garin, who were filled with too much anticipation to eat just yet. Thrain sat by the fire, along with Cambron, and the men looked somber as they just shook their heads at Garin and Rugal, who were staring at them expectantly. The next day the company had to reluctantly return to the kingdom with solemn news. They arrived back at the capital city Eroth over a week later, as Thrain and Cambron presented their findings, or lack of, at the council meeting. With nothing to show or do, but research and study more, they all returned to their normal lives while Grand Magister Cambron and the other magisters of the kingdom came together to find a solution to the tower problem. On the night of the second full moon since the tower appeared, a shadow began to overcast the moon, blocking it out entirely. Thrain, who was unable to sleep and looking at the moon at the time, felt a strong sense of drowsiness overcome him, and he was unable to remain awake no matter how he struggled. The next thing he knew, he was standing at the tower base in front of the doors with the devil engraved on them. Silent and swift the doors opened inward and countless eyes glowed in the endless darkness inside, most red or yellow but some even sapphire or violet. Soon enough the eyes faded and a voice echoed from inside,
"To whomever manages to reach the topmost floor of the tower first, one wish of any desire, power, wealth, or otherwise shall be granted. But be wary, the tower inhabitants will attempt to stop you from climbing and making your wish come true. Beware the devil inside."
Thrain woke up in sudden exhilaration, covered in sweat and gasping for breath. He was on the carpet floor of his keep with the first rays of morning light shining into the room.
"Thrain!"
Jezebel cried out from her bed. Thrain rose to his feet and came over to her.
"What is wrong? Is it the baby?"
he asked. Jezebel shook her head and said,
"No, it wasn't the baby, I just had this surreal dream. I was at that devil tower off in the distance, as in actually in front of it. It was exactly as you described it to me, then the doors opened up and there were these glaring eyes in the dark and a voice inside. It said be the first to climb the tower and have any wish you desire granted."
Thrain spoke quietly saying,
"Yeah, I had the exact same dream too."
Before long he was already getting dressed in his commander robes.
"I need to call a council meeting about this,"
he said, pulling his boots on and tying them.
"For now I want you to keep this weird dream stuff between us, who knows what would happen if word about this got around."
Thrain rushed out the door of his keep and jogged through the halls to the spiral stone steps. At the bottom of the steps he found Garin dressed in his formal wear rushing to the stairs himself. He stopped and let out a small gasp at Thrain's sight, saying,
"Thrain! I was just coming to meet you, we have a problem."
Thrain continued on walking at a brisk pace, going south to the throne room saying,
"Can it wait? I have urgent news that the entire council needs to hear."
He would say no more of it in open.
"Sir, if it's about the dream of the tower, then that is what I came to speak with you about,"
Garin said hastily. Thrain stopped in place and turned around to stare at Garin. He searched his eyes, then asked,
"You had the dream too?"
Garin let out a partial sigh, then said,
"Yes, and I'm not the only one."
Then he turned his head and looked over past Thrain. And for the first time Thrain finally noticed all of the castle servants moving about and talking quietly to each other. The entire castle was livelier than it had ever been at such an early hour.
"What is going on? Why are all the servants up and so active this early?"
Thrain asked.
"That's what I am trying to tell you,"
Garin said with a hint of irritation.
"I had the same dream as did my..."
He paused a moment in thought for his next words, then continued.
"Evening servant. And after getting dressed I found many others up and about. All talking about the same dream. It seems the whole castle is alive with this talk. I don't believe this,
Thrain muttered under his breath. Then he looked back at Garen and said,
All right, you go find Lord Tarbeck or someone who can. I will speak with the king.
Several hours had gone by since everyone had the dream, and it seemed more than just the castle inhabitants had it, the entire city was talking about it. Since everyone seemed to have the dream, so far there was no point in calling a council meeting to discuss it, and even now King Alden sent out a handful of men to guard the tower in case the doors were truly open. He didn't want anything getting out unchecked. The many days that followed were chaotic as King Alden had to deal with more and more people inquiring about the tower and if it's safe for them to journey inside. The promise of any wish granted was too tempting for the common man, it seemed. He knew it wouldn't be long until some of his knights had gotten too curious about the tower and abandoned the kingdom to search it out if they had to. Alden's prime concerns came a couple weeks later when his spies confirmed for him that the dream had entered the thoughts of the other three kingdoms. He feared for how long it would take before the other kingdoms turned their sights on his lands in an attempt to get into what is now being called, Devil Tower. Chapter 2 Thrain and Company, Chapter 1 King Alden sat in the quiet and empty library reading over a large book by candlelight. Footsteps casually approached him and a voice asked,
You wanted to see me, my king?
The voice was Thrain, Alden knew without having to turn from his book. Alden finished whatever he was reading in silence, then placed the golden ribbon, attached to the binding of the book, between the pages and shut it.
Take a seat.
Thrain sat and Alden glanced at him, then back to his closed book.
You know this book is a collection of numerous legends and stories around Grimnar, some dating back to 800 years ago. I don't think many people believe that any of these stories were true. I don't believe half of them myself. I don't understand what you're trying to say, Your Grace.
Alden smirked and continued.
My favorite story of all time in here is one about a sailor whose ship capsized and he is saved by a maiden of the sea that's half human half fish called a mermaid. The mermaid takes the sailor to her underwater kingdom where he lives for a time until he himself begins turning into a fish. Getting these webbing between his fingers and toes and all that stuff. The sailor, after seeing that, is said to return home and tell his tale to everyone. What I find most spectacular about this story is not only was the sailor from Evercane, but there were numerous witnesses claiming to see him come ashore partially transformed into a fish himself. Some of these witnesses were legitimate nobles of our kingdom, which gave the merit of truth to this tale. Of course, because this was about 80 years ago, no one believes it anymore, but I believe in it all. I mean, why not? With all the other magic around this world, why is it so hard to believe in an underwater kingdom of magic fish people?
Alden let out a deep sigh, then turned to Thrain and asked.
Do you think when this Devil Tower is gone that in 100 years people will still believe it ever existed?
Thrain gave it some thought, then said,
If we don't find a way to destroy the tower, then our people will not even make it past another few generations.
His tone was dark and a little pessimistic.
I agree, which is why I called you here so late. You're here to talk about a mission about going into the Devil Tower. This is a very serious thing to consider. I mean, we don't even know what's in there. We have already considered it. And by we you mean?
Alden looked a little ashamed for what he was about to say next.
Me Grand Magister Cambron and Lord Tarbeck have had many long talks about this whole thing. The three of us have come to the conclusion that the only way we can save our lands from the decaying effects of the tower is for a few of our own to climb to its top and get that wish.
Thrain was absolutely shocked by the plan, almost appalled.
Your Grace, with all due respect, you can't really be thinking of sending our forces up into that thing? How do we even know that the wish granted is for real? It could all be an elaborate trap by some sort of demon king of the tower. We don't even know what is inside there yet. I know, Thrain, I know. But how long will it be until our enemies decide to see for themselves if that wish is true? And if it is true, who knows how bad the world would be off if some maniac got it? Even if it is not real, when enough people believe and hope in it, and we can use that to inspire our kingdom and dissuade our enemies from making a move against us.
Thrain shook his head. He was against the idea in every way.
Sire, this is a bad idea. I don't like it all. My mind is made up, Commander,
Alden said obstinately. Thrain knew when Alden addressed him by his title over his name that there was no more arguing. It was obey the king's command or commit treason. Reluctantly Thrain asked, Who are you sending on this mission, sire?
You and my son, Rugal. There are no others I trust more in this entire kingdom than you two, that and the queen. But I want you to choose 8 others to bring with you on this mission. People you know, and people you can trust. Only they can know what you are up to and where you are going, tell no one else. And my wife?
Thrain asked.
Can I at least tell her?
Alden smiled lightly and said,
I wouldn't have it otherwise. I will wait little over a month after your departure until I tell the news of this to the kingdom. That ought to give you a nice head start by then.
Alden hesitated to say more, then found his voice.
There is a storm coming, my friend. I don't know when, but I know it will be huge, and if something isn't done I fear it will swallow these entire lands, not just our kingdom. All I know is it has something to do with the Devil Tower. I will have my team assembled in 2 weeks' time.
The next morning Thrain told Jezebel about his mission to the Devil Tower, and she was deeply upset by it. She feared Thrain may not be around for her when their child was born. The two stayed in bed that morning cuddling. They wouldn't have much time for that in a long while.
I would rather we took a ship from Lemia's port and sailed to a new land,
Jezebel said.
The king has an army and the tower is still on our borders, just send them all up there and the king can make the wish himself. If there is even a wish to be made at the top,
Thrain countered.
Layarin won't let this world fall to the darkness. If things get too bad she will appear again to push the shadows back to their corners where they belong.
She stopped to run her hand along the 3 long scars running over Thrain's front torso. From chest to abdomen they were, to him, like physical memories of some of his toughest battles ever.
Besides,
she continued,
you have suffered and killed enough for your kingdom.
Thrain took her hand and looked into her eyes and said,
yes, and all I have done has been to protect my family, my kingdom, my home. I won't let all that happened in the past be for nothing to just run away from the future. And you love our home as much as me, you're just experiencing mood swings from the baby is all.
He kissed her on the forehead and went back to relaxing for a time until a knock came at the door. With an aggravated sigh Thrain got out of bed and put on some pants. He walked to the door saying to himself,
might I never get a morning again to just sit in bed with my wife and relax.
On the other side of the door was Grand Magister Cameron. He looked like he had not slept in days with the dark bags under his eyes and his hair more crazy than normal. He was lost in thoughts elsewhere for a moment after Thrain opened the door, but soon came to his senses and said,
if I may a word with you this morning, whenever it is a good time of course.
He wanted to turn him away until midday, but the Magister looked very busy and he didn't want to keep him from his other duties for any longer than he needed to.
Give me a moment to put on some more clothes,
Thrain said before shutting the door. A minute later he came back fully dressed in more casual attire and took a walk with Cameron.
As I am sure you have already guessed that this is about your mission to the Devil Tower,
Cameron said.
Did you want to join my company?
Thrain asked before Cameron could continue.
Well, not exactly, more to the point I would like for Vera to join the company in my place. No offense Grand Magister, but Vera does not seem to be the fighting type and I have no doubts that there will be a lot of fighting that goes on in that tower. I might not rush into battle there, but some things will likely to be unavoidable, and I cannot guarantee her safety when I don't know what to expect inside that place. I know she may not be as tough as many of our war magi, but she is not without her training and can, for the most part, protect herself much better than people would give her credit for. Besides, she is very intelligent and can be resourceful. Keep in mind Sir Thrain, she is next in line to become Grand Magister after I pass away. Not to mention, not all problems can be solved with violence. You may find yourself blocked with a puzzle on one of those many floors, and who better to help than a great magi?
The two kept silent for a time as they passed by a number of castle servants doing their morning rounds. When the servants were out of earshot they continued the conversation.
The other issue I find with Vera is I don't know her, so I cannot fully trust her on something this important.
Cameron stopped walking and asked,
do you trust me then, Sir Thrain? If I were asking you to take me along, would you agree to do so without much hesitation?
Thrain stopped.
Without hesitation? No. But if you requested to join the company, then I would be a damned fool to turn you down. Still, I might do so all the same, since the kingdom may have great need of you in these times to come. And yes, I do trust you, Grand Magister. Then I ask you now to trust me in my judgment when I vouch for Vera on this. I know she has abused her power and position time to get naive young women into her bedchambers, but she is loyal to the kingdom and the king. Besides, I need her in that tower more for academic purposes than any. With her intelligence, she might be able to discover a way to bring the tower down from the inside, or at least help us better understand it and find a way to stop its decay effects upon these lands. I will not bother you any more on the subject, nor will I beg for you to take her along with you. It is your team, and I trust your judgment regardless of what it may be. If you do decide to take her along, please tell her yourself, as I am a very busy man and cannot waste time as a messenger.
With that, Cameron continued ahead, leaving Thrain to think about his next companion. Thrain found Garen and Prince Rugal outside in the combat yard dueling with unsharp Aeneid practice swords. There were some other knights dueling as well, honing their skills, but most out there were watching the prince and the squire battle. He had to push through the ring of knights surrounding them just to see them. When he got there, the both of them were out of breath and staring each other down. They were not finished with their duel just yet, but Thrain was in a hurry, so he stepped between them before either could make the next move.
You two can finish this daring fight later,
Thrain said.
For now I must speak with my squire, privately.
When no one moved right away, Thrain turned to the knights around them and shouted.
For the rest of you, this means show is over. Get back to training.
The knights quickly dispersed around the combat yard, setting back up to their normal exercise positions while Thrain walked away, Garen shortly following behind him. He led Garen to a quiet wing of the west part of the castle where voices would not carry. And in a quiet tone he spoke.
I'm taking a team to climb the Devil Tower on order of the king, and I want you to join us. Who else is going?
Garen asked.
Right now just me and Prince Rugal for sure, but it will be a company of 10 and I have already thought of the others I wish to bring. Keep in mind this is your choice and we don't know what sort of dangers we will face inside that tower. I want you to think over this for a couple days before getting back to me. And one final thing before I leave you to think it over. This cannot be told to anyone. It must remain a secret from everyone except for myself, Rugal and King Alden. And do not talk about this in the open, I don't want the whispers getting to wrong ears.
Outside in the courtyard, Rugal stood in the grass staring up at the sky. His guards stood a fair distance from him, half hidden in the shadows, keeping a sharp eye out for any unexpected company. In time Garen found him out there. He would often return to the courtyard to gaze at the stars when he had an abundance of free time. As Garen approached him, Rugal asked,
Do you think the Devil Tower can reach all the way to the stars? Close enough even, to touch them?
Garen thought about the answer, and looked south towards the tower. During day you could see it climb high above and beyond the clouds and go further than your own sight. But at night when the moon retreated it was invisible, and for a time you could almost forget it was even there.
Wouldn't that be something?
Garen finally answered.
Garen Lockhart, the first man to touch the stars. And Prince Rugal Everkane, the first man to technically be recorded to touch the stars. It's good to know that you will be joining us on the climb up the tower. Thrain told you already? Seems fast, I just told him my answer this morning.
Rugal turned to face his friend now.
Thrain told me nothing,
he said.
But I assumed he would ask you, and I already knew if he did you would say yes. I just needed you to confirm it for me, which you just did when you answered my question and then asked your own.
It took Garen a minute to fully realize what had happened. When he did he scoffed and said,
The first question was the bait to lure me into speaking about the tower. And then the second was the trap springing around me. I dare to say you have mastered the art of verbal deception. If only you could apply that deception further to your swordplay, then you would be a stronger fighter.
Rugal shoved Garen playfully and said,
Last time we fought I won, and the time before that too. Besides, with my friends and mentor I fight with honor and grace. But trust me when I tell you that when the time comes to fight our real enemies, I won't hold anything back.
For a moment, and the first time ever, Garen felt a strong sense of unease while being around his friend. He could always sense that Rugal was holding something back in their duels, but now he knew that he was right. At the time though, Garen couldn't decide if it was a good thing or a bad thing.
Anyways,
Rugal continued.
The question was sincere. Which brings me to another question I wanted to ask you. If you got the wish, what would you wish for? Truthfully, I have not thought of it,
Garen said.
I still don't fully believe the wish is for real or not. But so long as the wish betters my kingdom and saves our people, then I suppose it does not really matter.
After some thought, Garen continued.
Although maybe I would wish to fly, be able to see the world in a whole new perspective. What about you? You know, my father told me a bedtime story once to give me some interesting dreams. It was about a man who was walking down a beach, stumbled upon a lamp, that after he rubbed, out came a mystical person who told him his reward for freeing the mystical one, he would be granted any 3 wishes he desired. He made his first wish in haste, also not fully believing in the wish either. His wish was for untold riches, and so mere seconds after he spoke it, a tidal wave rushed in and flooded that part of the beach with countless gold coins, diamonds, and gems. The first wish was granted, but the man had nothing to carry his riches with, and while he waited on the beach contemplating what to do with it, a gang of thieves happened to be coming along and discovered the great treasure. And they nearly killed the man for all the riches there, so he had to flee with only a handful of his wealth. His next wish was for power, to be the new ruler of the lands. And so his wish was granted once more, and for a time it was working out well for him. Until his people eventually turned on him for being a terrible ruler. Once more his wish nearly cost him his life as the bloodthirsty citizens surrounded him. But he had one more wish left. And he wished he never found that lamp at all, and so it had been. The man returned to the beach, no memory of what had happened, and the lamp disappeared. When I was a child I thought very little of it all and just enjoyed the story, but lately I had been thinking more and more about that story and why the wishes went so bad. Is it that the nature of all wishes are just evil and will bring misery and danger to those who make them? Perhaps it was the folly of the man and the way he wished.
Rugal was silent after that, lost in thought once more until Garen spoke.
Perhaps it was neither,
he said.
Perhaps it was simply the creature itself granting the wishes to the man that made them backfire or come out not fully what he intended. You know, Rugal, you never told me what you would wish for if you got the wish.
Truthfully, Rugal said, turning back to look at the stars.
I wouldn't wish for anything. I fear too much what horrible way my wish or any wish granted by that tower might turn back on the person or the world itself. My father may want to use the wish to help our kingdom out, but I believe the only way to do that is by destroying the tower before its influence spreads too far.
Chapter 3 Thrain and Company, Chapter 2 4 leagues away from the Great Elm Gate lay a small ranger village called Timberbrook. Inside the village was made purely of wood, no stone, metals, or other materials were used in its constructions or designs. The small village has a famous tavern called Woodland Elixir, that is where Thrain sought out his next companion. As Thrain opened the doors to the tavern, all the rangers' eyes swiftly moved to him. They knew right away from his entrance that he was not a ranger. Not just the tavern, but the entire village disliked anyone who was not a ranger, and though this particular village was in the lands of Evercane, there were many more ranger villages like it around all of Grimnar. The rangers held no particular allegiance to any of the kingdoms, unless they were rewarded to do so for a time. They were like forest mercenaries, but they lived by a code. Part of the ranger code, as Thrain had understood it, was that they would not cause unnecessary trouble while inside the borders of a kingdom, unless those borders stretched into the forest lands. However, anything went when it came to the free lands, which had been gradually disappearing as kingdoms slowly expanded their borders over the years. Typically the rangers would persuade other folk who entered their village to turn away and leave, usually this meant forceful persuasion. Thrain was one of the few people allowed into the ranger village, as he came on fair terms and left on good ones. The tavern had very few patrons at the time. Thrain didn't know if this was uncommon or not. At the center on the ground floor of the tavern sat a dark-haired ranger with a cloak of green shades. Next to her was another girl who looked like a half-ranger from what Thrain could tell, if any such thing existed. He knew the dark-haired one, Adalyn Gorfel. She was an old friend of his who was among the only rangers to aid him in pushing back the Kenter forces from invading through the Great Elm Gate. He took a seat at the square table with the two girls, and Adalyn smiled as he did. He noticed for the first time a curved scar on the left side of her face going from the chin to the edge of her eye. Thrain pointed to his face with one finger, as if to mimic her face, and said, "This is new. Good story at least." Adalyn's smile seemed to grow from the comment as she ran a finger down the scar. Then she said, "Actually it's nothing more than this little one throwing a fit, if you can believe it." She put her arm around the young woman's shoulder and gave her a playful shake. The young woman with Adalyn, now that Thrain could see her closer, had long moss-green hair, yellow eyes, and long sharp nails. She stood up to more appropriately greet him, and he could see she was slender and short. And wore a tight midriff dark green vest, and tight shorts, of the same color, reaching high up to her thighs. She was ugly at first sight, but Thrain quickly grew accustomed to her appearance. Adalyn sat her down and said to her, "Easy there, cougar, he's married." The young woman looked down at her feet in embarrassment, and Adalyn continued. "This here is my young apprentice Lessa. She cannot speak, but she has her ways of communication, so understanding her is not impossible. She surpassed me in many ways of being a ranger, but still has a few things more to master, so she is not quite a full-fledged ranger yet." "That's great and all, but I did come here to seek you out for your help," Thrain said, interrupting her before she could go on. Adalyn sat back in her chair, and her face became more serious. "You're here because you need me to help you accomplish something having to do with the tower, aren't you?" Thrain sighed lightly and said, "Yes, I am afraid that it is just that. You know that messenger hawk I gave you before you left here the last time has not come by for many weeks before a few days ago.
I know our letters are short and few between, but you had me worried for a time. The first night is always busy, but truth be told, since Jezebel's pregnancy she has been more dramatic than usual about our friendship. I had planned to send a short letter out to you explaining the situation, but then the tower and the dream happened, and unfortunately my next message to you had to be a request to meet instead of a greeting. You know, sometimes I would like to take my wife and venture up to the Targal Mountains, leave it all behind in caring hands and be at peace.
Adeline half laughed at the last part and said,
Thrain Egrin, mountain man.
She paused a moment and thought before continuing.
I don't know, that seems to have a nice theme to it. But the wilds are no place to raise a child. Perhaps in older age you and Jezebel could retire up there, but not just yet.
Thrain glanced around the tavern and asked,
Is there somewhere where we might finish this conversation in private?
Adeline led him to a small house at the far end of the village. Inside was little more than a kitchen, bathing room, dining area, and a single bedroom. They sat around the dining room table, which was small and couldn't fit more than 4 people at once.
This is my house I own for the times I'm staying in the village,
Adeline explained.
I don't use it often because I'm usually in the woods, but I always keep some supplies here in case. Anyways, no one will overhear us here.
Getting straight into it, Thrain said,
I am creating a small team to climb to the top, the Devil Tower, and obtain that wish. You know which one I am talking about, right? I'm pretty sure the whole lands know of that wish, but I didn't know you believed in that sort of thing. I don't, only a small part of me believes in it, but I'm not too naive about it. Tell me, have you been to the base of the tower yet? No. That thing scares me. Truth be told, I was reluctant to even come back into the kingdom with that thing around. Why do you ask? If you had, then you would know that the lands around the tower are decaying rapidly. And its influence has gradually spread out further and further. It's about a mile of decayed lands a month, by estimation. It sounds surreal, I know, but it is the truth. Actually, that sounds very reasonable. All of the animals in the forest have been swiftly migrating away, all in directions away from the tower. That's a big part of the reason I'm afraid of it. If the animals are all ignoring their instincts about the dangers of winter to flee away from something that's already miles between them, then it cannot be good. Anyways, what's so special about this team you're assembling? Why not just take your kingdom's greatest knights up there? The problem is the prize waiting at the top of the tower. If it is indeed any wish we want, then what's to stop one of the knights from stealing the wish from under us at the best possible moment? I need more than just strong people, I need people I know and can trust. If we cannot find a way to destroy the tower from within, then that wish may be our last hope. And it must be made for the good of the kingdom and perhaps the whole lands.
Adeline crooked a smile and asked mischievously,
And how do you know I won't do that same thing?
Thrain smirked and said,
If I could trust you when many more lives than just my own were relying on you, then I am sure I can trust you now. Besides, I like to think that I have a solid judge of character and don't believe you would do something like that, not without tremendous cause at least. And I like to think of us as friends.
Adeline took in a deep breath, then let it out slowly and said,
Can I have time to think it over? Of course, but I cannot wait more than a day. I will need your answer by tomorrow. Time is not on mine, or anyone else's side.
The next day at high noon, Thrain returned to Adeline's small house to seek her answer. Over a small meal she told him that she would go, but under the condition that Lessa also joined them, as she would not part with the young woman so easily. Thrain was partially against it, but Adeline trusted Lessa more than she trusted him, which said a lot and meant to him that Lessa had to be remarkable in some way to earn her trust so greatly.
All right,
Thrain said.
If you trust her so much, then she can join. I'm still lacking in companions anyways. But I want to know, who is she and how did you meet?
Adeline was silent for a time, trying to decide where to start.
Well, I suppose to start, some years ago I was on my way back down from the mountains when at the heart of the woods I found Lessa. She was unconscious, absolutely naked, and starved so thin that her skin looked wrapped tightly around her bones. I thought her dead for a moment until I touched her, to check if she was alive, and she sprung up so fast I couldn't fully dodge the attack. Her nail caught me coming up, and tore through my skin with ease, and that's how I got this scar on my face. Anyways, the next time she woke up I was more prepared, and had a small fire going with a cooked rabbit sitting near her and me across, weapon at the ready in case she tried to attack me again. She instead took the rabbit and devoured it in few bites. She still wouldn't let me near her, but she was also too weak to move far, so after a few days of feeding her, and bringing her fresh water, she finally warmed up to me and began following me everywhere I went. So I stayed in the woods raising her for the most part as she developed and matured at an incredible rate. When I found her she was no more than 5 years of age at least, but she swiftly grew to a young woman of 15 years. Thus far her aging seems to have stabilized, but I'm not sure how her growth rate will expand in the coming years. In our time together I taught her the ways of the ranger, how to fight, and ways to understand our language. Although she cannot speak them, she knows what we're saying. She's like my own daughter if you would.
Thrain rubbed his chin and said,
So then that's why you trust her so much. I cannot say I won't be weary of her at times, she does give off a dangerous vibe. But she does sound like she has a strong will, and perhaps that's what I need more on my team than raw strength. What are you planning to do about the rest of your companions? How many people do you have left to find? The king wants me to find 10 people I can trust, and now I have 6 with you too. This endeavor is turning into an obnoxious nightmare. What's that say to you anyways? The fact that with the entire kingdom at my disposal I am struggling so hard just to find 10 other people I can trust to climb this tower with. It says you're expecting too much of people,
Adeline said condescending.
No one in this world is as selfless as you like to believe, that they would risk their life for a chance of something so great only to give it up to another. They will sacrifice their lives to protect their kingdom, homes, and families, sure. But why sacrifice your life for a kingdom when you can have your own, if not all of them, so easily in your grasp? And that is exactly why you don't turn to grab your best knights and warriors of the kingdom to climb that tower. Because you don't know how they would react at a given opportunity of ultimate power, should it exist.
Thrain scoffed and said,
Some days you're too smart for your own good, you know that? But you're right all the same, that's exactly how the situation is for me.
They were silent for a time while Adeline contemplated something quietly to herself. Eventually she said,
I know someone who may join us. He would meet all your prerequisites and he's a good and honest man. However, he is very abnormal and doesn't converse with others too frequently. And you trust this man? What's his name and where does he come from? I trust him to a point, but he's a simple man, and as I said before, good and honest. Anyways, his name is Kurth, and he comes from the Targal Mountains, before that I cannot say. The Targal Mountains are too far away for me to venture to see if I might recruit someone whom I have never met before. I don't have a lot of time left to form this company. Well, that's the thing, he's actually in town now, came in very early this morning and is probably at the tavern now arguing with the bartender. It's pretty common for them to argue actually.
Thrain tapped his index finger on the wooden table repeatedly. He was a little desperate and thinking. With much reluctance he said,
All right, let's go meet this mountain man.
Back inside the Woodland Elixir Tavern, Thrain could see a large man standing at the end of the tavern arguing over the counter. The large man shouted,
What you mean you can't be giving me any more? Tell me tab's been paid.
His accent was thick and his voice strong.
I already paid me tab off from the last 2 months, now damn it I want me drink. Your tab was owed 10 pounds of gold and you only paid me in 8 pounds,
the bartender on the other side of the counter argued.
I bet that their gold nugget is pure gold and has more value than dem melted down coins of gold you lot use. It's hard enough to account how much you owe this tavern when it's paid in measurements of weight instead of coin value, and now you're trying to add in purity of the gold. That's not something I can measure, and our deal has always been that your tab of drinks will reach a certain converted weight of gold from cost of coins. If the weight doesn't add up to your tab, then you get no drinks, go it. But what's a couple pound of gold anyways? That stuff can't fill your belly. Can't we just carry over the money owed to the new tab? Come on Matchel, you know I'm always good for me debts.
Adeline stepped in to interrupt the argument and speak to Kurth. After a short word, the large man turned to look at Thrain, then back to Adeline. They spoke some more, then he turned back around and approached Thrain. Thrain could see more details about the mountain man now that he was facing him and was closer. He looked to be about 8 feet in height and had a very strong build. His orange hair twirled around itself and reached down to his shoulders. His beard, of the same color, was large and bushy. He wore a heavy coat with a bear pelt stitched around it. His pants and boots had wolf pelts stitched onto them as well.
What you be needing of me?
The large man asked.
Kurth, I presume.
Thrain responded.
Aye, that be me. But I ask what you need of me. I'm forming a company of strong companions. I want to speak to you about possibly joining it.
Kurth laughed deep from his throat, a genuine laugh, non-mocking. Then he said,
You want me to follow you into battle? Then you show me your strength first, come outside.
Then Kurth without further word stepped past Thrain and went outside. Adeline had come up behind Thrain, who was turned to watch Kurth go, and said,
you're going to have to beat him in single combat before he will talk with you seriously. I didn't come to fight. That was his condition on hearing you, if you don't fight he won't even listen to you. And Thrain, don't hold back, he's much more powerful than you might think.
Outside in the town square, Kurth was waiting for Thrain. His bear pelt coat was removed and sat on the ground off to the side. He now wore a simple brown leather vest and his arms had defining outlines of muscle, his pecs showed through the leather almost the size of a man's torso. He wielded a massive double-sided axe made of mithril, as far as Thrain could see. The axe itself was as large as Thrain, but Kurth spun it around him like it was an ash pole. Left with little other choice, Thrain unsheathed his sword, a blue steel longsword with a silver falcon head pommel. The blade was adamantite and weighed practically nothing with incredible resistance and was near indestructible. They stood 20 yards apart. Thrain turned sideways holding the blade closer to him with both hands. Kurth sprinted at Thrain with incredible speed, coming within slashing distance of him and his axe. Instead of making an overhead slash, like he appeared to be prepped for, he stopped suddenly, skidding a little forward in the dirt, and spun around, holding the doubled edge's axe outwards. Thrain's surprise at Kurth's speed and tactics cost him. Instead of dodging like he wanted, he was forced to turn and meet the swing head-on with his blade slashing down full force. The metals clashed in a low-pitched ring and Thrain was instantly thrown off his feet and onto his back a few feet away, completely overwhelmed by Kurth's raw strength. Fast on his feet, Kurth raced after the fallen Thrain, following his spin through with an overhead swing of the axe, intended to cut Thrain down the middle where he lay. At the last possible moment, Thrain rolled out of the way of the attack and used his momentum to rise to his feet again. He was lucky he had not been wearing his armor today. With it he lost a lot of speed, and against someone as fast and powerful as Kurth, the armor would have only gotten in his way. He quickly rushed to Kurth and jabbed the sword at the massive man's throat, stopping just as the tip touched the skin.
You fought well, but it's over now,
Thrain said. Lightly, Kurth chuckled, then said,
Oh, it not be over just yet.
Then without any forewarning, Kurth pulled his head back and grabbed the blade with his free hand. Thrain tried to pull the blade back as he went for it, but Kurth caught it all the same. Blood began oozing out of his hand and flowing like a waterfall, but he held tight. He half-spun the axe in his other hand and brought it up to swing at Thrain. He paused a moment to say,
Ye might wanna run away now.
Then he swung his massive axe, almost like a punch. The edge of the axe was racing towards Thrain's neck, but in a blur of speed he pulled his blade free of Kurth's grip, which was lubricated from his blood now, and dodged the axe by diving between his legs. Coming out behind Kurth, Thrain sliced the back of his knee as he went to twist around to face Thrain. He stumbled but didn't fall, and Thrain dived into his back and knocked him onto his side. Kurth rolled onto his back just in time to see Thrain standing over his neck, blade held downward. Swift and powerful, Thrain stabbed his blade down deep as it would go. Just grazing the side of his neck, Kurth saw the knight's blade sticking but half a foot out of the ground. He would have been dead right then and there if Thrain wanted to kill him. Instead of breathing heavily out of fear, Kurth laughed and waited for the knight to pull his blade and step back to stand up.
Oh boy, oh, never have I before been bested. I faced me some tough basters before, but never had a one of them beaten me. I faced knights, magicians, even monsters, but always came out on top. But you, hiding those tricks up your sleeve for so long, very impressive.
Thrain was still catching his breath when Kurth finished talking. He sheathed his sword when it looked like Kurth had fully accepted defeat. He wiped the sweat from his brow and said,
You completely caught me off guard too, I will admit. I didn't expect you to be so strong or fast, and your skin, it's thick, isn't it? Most people who haven't seen me fight before don't know what I'm capable of and end up dying in the first couple of moves. None of them ever figured out how tough my skin was, though. How were you the first to realize it?
Thrain pointed to Kurth's hand, the one that had been cut, but was now only dripping blood instead of pouring out, and said,
My blade is strong and sharp enough to cut in half 4-inch thick steel shields. But you grabbed it with your bare hand, and instead of lopping right off, it only bled out. In addition, you were able to hold onto it and keep me from removing it with ease. Very good, you're not only strong but wise too. But you should be more careful with those magic bursts you've been using. Let your body warm up to it first, otherwise it will leave you like that. Or worse. You caught on to that, hey? Well, you gave me no other choice but to use them early on. Trust me though, should we ever fight again, I won't underestimate you a second time. You better keep yourself in good shape, cause one of them days I am gonna want to rematch you here. For now though, let us celebrate with some elixir. It's all on me too, so drink as much as ye like.
Thrain had a good laugh at that, then said,
I think you still have an unpaid part have to deal with. But yes, let's go settle that matter and get on to our business.
Fortunately for Thrain, he had enough gold and silver coins on hand to pay off the rest of Kurth's tab and order a round of drinks. The elixir itself was pricey at 2 silver coins per a mug. He used Adelin's message hawk to send a letter to King Alden requesting a chest full of gold to be sent over to him at the village right away. Thrain hoped it would not take too long to arrive there as he still had others to find. Over the round of drinks they talked. Kurth chugged down his mug of elixir, slammed it on the table and hollered for more before he said anything.
So you wants me to join your team eh? Well, more accurately, I'd like to know who you are before I consider that,
Thrain said.
First I'd like to know where you come from. Did Adelin not tell you? I come from the Targal Mountains. I was born there. I think. Anyways, was raised by an old mountain hermit till the age of 7 where he passed away, rest his soul. And after that I began traveling around the mountains for a few years till that got boring and I went further. And you've traveled far? Das right. All around the world in fact. Met lots of new people, some fun, some bad, most boring though. Have you ever killed anyone before or fought for one the kingdoms around?
Kurth's other round of drink came up and he chugged that down before answering the questions.
I killed people before, many want to go at Kurth the mighty adventurer, but none before had beaten me. Mind you, if I can help it I don't kill them unless they be bad people, then I have no problem cutting them down. As for the kingdoms, I fight for myself, or for fun, never fought for anyone else before really. Another mug.
He shouted out at the end.
And how did you know the people you killed were bad? I can just tell if someone is good or bad, they have this feel to them, you know? Like you're a good person, I can tell. And strong too, I like that. Alright then, one last question before we move on, if you had a wish that could give anything you wanted, what would it be?
With little hesitation Kurth said,
Easy, I'd wish for a fountain with this elixir gushing out of it.
His next mug had come by already and right after that he began chugging it down like he never before had a drink in his life. Thrain was silent for some time after that, thinking to himself. To break the silence, Adelin and Kurth talked about some of Kurth's adventures. And as he was telling his tale of how he wrestled a bear over some giant vase he caught, Thrain cut in saying,
The company I am forming is made for climbing the top of the Devil Tower, and attaining the promised wish for the good of the kingdom. If you agree to help me and my company reach the top of the tower, then the kingdom would pay you 10 times your weight in gold. However, since you don't seem fond of gold, and instead have a strong desire for this elixir, then perhaps instead we could finance your tab here for as long as you live. Right now I have a chest filled with gold coming on its way that should be more than enough to cover your drinks here for a month. And if you want, I can have it arranged that a chest comes by every month for you to pay for your future drinks, if you so desire.
Kurth scratched his beard in thought.
If you be willing to cover my tab for life, then I will help you climb that tower. Hell, I might even get on me knees and suck your danglees.
Then he burst into a massive laughter that spread to Thrain and Adelin. After drinks, Thrain returned to Adelin's home to wait until the gold chest arrived so he could arrange the deal with the tavern manager. As they got into the house, Adelin asked,
So what was that magic bursts thing you and Kurth were talking about after your fight anyways? I am dying to know. Weird thing to ask me now, isn't it?
Thrain asked. Adelin just shrugged, but he answered anyways.
The magic bursts, as Kurth put them, is a way for a non-magician to tap into their latent magic abilities and use it to greatly enhance their speed, strength, well, all physical attributes really, to unparalleled heights. But if you don't warm your body up by letting the magic in you flow naturally as you call upon it, then you will burn yourself out fast. Wow, that sounds epic. I wouldn't mind learning about it. Where did you first learn it? From my father, before he died.
Thrain said solemn.
It's very dangerous and I'm not really sure how to teach it to anyone else. Right now, though, I am tired and shall be going to sleep. Alright, but just one more question before you sleep,
Adelin insisted.
Please just make it fast then,
Thrain said, irritated.
Are you sure you don't want to think about Kurth joining us more? I mean, I do trust him greatly and think he would be invaluable to your cause, but usually you would contemplate something like this for days. That's simple, it's because time is the one thing I don't have. I have little over a week left to find 4 others to join the company now, and Kurth is a humble, strong, and straightforward man. In my current situation I can't possibly ask for more. Plus he warmed up on me.
The small chest of gold Thrain sent for arrived by sunset, guarded by a few knights. They had to ride day and night to get from the capital to there so fast. Thrain took the chest of gold to the tavern owner, Tara, to discuss the business proposition with her. While waiting for him to return, Kurth and Adeline traded war stories. They were talking for a couple hours at least before Thrain came back.
I paid off your tab with Tara and just paid for about a month's worth of drinks for you with that chest,
Thrain said.
But pay attention to how much you consume, cause they might try and cheat you out of several drinks near the end of the month. Also, I arranged for a chest just like that to be brought to you here at the first of every month. The guards won't stay more than a day. So if you miss it, it goes back to the kingdom treasury. Wonderful. Then you got yourself a new companion for your trip to the tower,
Kurth said.
Good. Then I must be off. Adeline, a word outside before I go.
Adeline went outside and walked with Thrain to his horse.
That was a nice thing you did for Kurth,
she said.
We need his help climbing the tower. Besides, I only paid Tara that single chest of gold. There won't be more coming unless I say so. So you lied to him then? We can work something out later if the payment isn't adequate for him. Right now I don't have time to barter. And for what I'm asking, all the gold I gave him now is a fair offer. Now then, I wanted to tell you that we should meet up at the tower base, near the entrance, in 8 days from tonight. If you get there before us, then just camp out and wait, we shouldn't be far behind.
Thrain rode his horse hard all night, racing to the capital city. When he got there, dawn was approaching and he sent his horse to the stables to rest. And found his way to Vera's room inside the castle. It took a few hard pounds at her door for her to get up and open it. She was stark naked. The aroma carrying from her room smelled heavily of sweat and special scented candles. Thrain could only imagine what sort of mess it was like in there.
Sir Thrain, what are you doing here at this hour?
Vera asked drowsy.
Grand Magister Cambron requested that I take you along with me inside the Devil Tower, and after much contemplation I have agreed to this. We leave at dawn in a week's time, make whatever arrangements you need to before then, and tell no one besides Cambron or the king directly about this. Oh, and don't pack too heavy, you must only bring what you can carry on your back.
Then he turned and left, and as he went, Vera gradually woke up further and became aware she was standing naked in front of the first knight that entire time. Leaving the Magister's corridors, Thrain went straight to the prince's room to find him. Rugal, fortunately, was already waking up when Thrain came by.
Thrain,
Rugal said in surprise.
Welcome back. Were you successful in finding the others? No, I'm still shy of 3 more people and I'm out of sources that I can contact in such limited time. That's why I'm here. I need you and Garen to help me seek out a few more companions before the week is out. Strong people that you know as well as yourself and you could trust with your life even in the most dire of situations. I will be verifying their worth when they meet me, so be prepared, and tell Garen he is to join you. Remember, this all must remain secret to only the other members of the team and those you find to join. For now I shall retire to my room. I have had a long and endearing ride.
Chapter 4 Thrain and Company, Chapter 3 Cambron took to a heavy knocking at the door and then pressed his ear gently to it to hear inside. From the other side he could hear the curses of a young woman as she had just been woken up and dressed to open the door. He pulled his ear away in time as it opened and Vera peeked her head out from the other side to see who it was. When she saw it was Cambron, she opened the door further. Her room was dark as night as she had kept the windows covered with thick curtains. She rubbed her eyes and asked,
Master Cambron, what are you doing here at this hour?
Cambron smiled lightly and said,
You have not called me master in a long time, my dear. You must be tired. As for the time, it is, in fact, a few hours into the morning. Shall we continue this conversation inside?
Vera sighed, as Cambron was not going to let her go back to sleep without his word, and stepped aside, opening the door further to allow him into her room. As he came in, Vera snapped her fingers and over a dozen candles suddenly lit up around the room, revealing her cloth to be a thin nightgown that could be easily seen through to her naked body in the light. In addition was the mess of clothes on the floor and scattered books on her desks. Her bed was ruffled and another body lay resting peacefully in it.
Would it be too much to ask for your guest to leave for a time?
Cambron asked, half condescending. Partially annoyed, Vera complied with Cambron and walked over to the side of the bed to wake her guest. From under the covers appeared a pretty young woman with dark curly hair and fair skin. She smiled at Vera's sight and kissed her on the lips. The two continued kissing romantically for a brief time until Cambron cleared his throat in a loud manner. Remembering her other guest, Vera pulled away from the young woman and told her she had to leave. She was a little upset but got out of bed all the same. Unlike Vera, she wore nothing at all and had no sense of modesty as she stretched out. Cameron politely turned his head away. The young woman swiftly dressed herself enough to leave the room with decency but still carried the rest of her wardrobe under her arms. When she was gone and the door shut behind her, Cameron spoke.
Has Thrain come to ask you to join the company yet?
Vera yawned and said,
Yesterday morning, in fact, he showed up even earlier than you. I almost didn't answer the door. And yes, he asked me to join the company and we leave out in just 6 days. In the morning.
She ended her sentence with heavy irritation in her voice.
Cameron lightly chuckled and said, Well, my dear, you best get used to mornings for Thrain, and I imagine all the others too, are well adjusted to getting up just before dawn. No more late nights with the city's harlots for a while.
Vera scoffed and said,
Excuse me, unlike many of the men in this city, I don't need to pay for sex. I know how to romanticize, and despite what they would tell you, many women like the company of other women over men, sometimes. And unlike men, I don't discard them like trash when we're done. That's also something I wanted to speak with you about. Inside the tower, I have no doubts that you will run across many other men, and to you some, if not most of these men, will only see you as something to put their dick in for a time. Thrain is a great man, an honorable man, and I know he wouldn't let anyone try such a thing with you against your will. And I'm sure his chosen companions will be just as good about not trying any such thing. But if you do get separated from the company, inside there try to avoid other males best you can. I know you can fight well, but sometimes men can only think with one head, and one mistake in battle is disastrous.
Vera turned away. The talk of rape made her a little squeamish. She had been no stranger to violence or gore since she had fought in battle alongside Cameron years ago when Kentor troops invaded from the Kashmir forest. With Thrain's leadership they managed to push the forces back before they could invade through the Great Elm Gate. But for the Magisters the fight had seen the most violence of those battles. The scattered army forces ran straight into the first Knight's traps, where Magisters were planted and ready to strike. Vera's war efforts that day are what got her truly noticed by the other council members, and with Cameron's recommendation she would later attain a proper seat onto the council. Cameron grabbed her hand and said,
Vera, you're only going there to gather knowledge about the tower from within. No one is forcing you to go, and you're under no orders to go. If at any time you think that place is too much for you to handle on your own, then come home immediately. I can go myself with greater numbers to conduct research if it is still needed.
She squeezed his hand and said,
I'll be all right, and any man that tries to force himself on me will feel the wrath of a great magister.
With that Cameron said his goodbyes and left her room. He found his way to the catacombs with an apparent leisure stroll. Down in the dank and darkened area Cameron found who he was looking for, Lord Tarbeck.
Randall,
Cameron said upon seeing him. Tarbeck darted his eyes around swiftly. The only visible area in the catacombs was that made by Cameron's magic.
So then everything is in place now?
Lord Tarbeck asked bluntly.
Yes, Thrain, Prince Rugal and Garen will be off to climb the tower, leaving on the morning 6 days from now. I have sent my apprentice with them as well. To get her away from the chaos while we work. That's a shame, she would have been invaluable to us in the times to come. Worry not, with the first knight, his squire, and the prince all gone from the kingdom, our plans will follow through near flawlessly. And if something goes wrong, then what?
Tarbeck asked nervously.
Then we improvise and adapt. Remember, we're doing this all for the good of the kingdom and all its people. We must not and shall not fail.
After finishing an early breakfast, Garen and Rugal dressed in brown ragged cloaks, pulling the hoods over their heads, before leaving the castle to walk down the city streets.
I assume we're going to see your paramour first?
Garen inquired during their walk.
Yes,
Rugal replied.
Iris is the first person I would go to for something like this, well after you or Thrain of course. Anyways, Thrain only gave us a week to do this and I honestly have no one else. How about you? I am sad to say I don't have anyone I know of well enough to call upon for this mission. I mean, if Thrain and all his contacts were not enough to gather 10 others, including us, then I doubt we can gather the rest in a week. I agree, and my father told me Thrain would have the team assembled in 2 weeks' time. Doesn't that seem way off his character? He's never been the arrogant type, and he should have known beforehand that it would probably take him at least a month to gather the exact people needed for this.
Garen thought about it before answering, then said,
You're right, it is out of his character. But if I recall, he didn't want to go into the tower at all, at least not without sending various scouts in to see what we may be dealing with. Besides, Jezebel is pregnant, and if I were him I wouldn't want to miss my first child's birth because I had to ascend that mysterious tower. Yes, I suppose that does make sense, but I still don't like how odd he's been acting, regardless of his reasons.
On the west side of the city in District Selma, where the poorer folk lived, was a stable master who rented out his steeds and sold his silence. Martin he was, and if you wanted to get somewhere fast without anyone knowing you had left, he was the guy to go to. Although what he was doing wasn't entirely in accordance with the king's laws, Rugal let it slide because he often wanted to leave the city unaccompanied and silently. Just inside the small stable hut Martin sat eating his breakfast. As his door swung open, he grabbed the knife from his table and rose swiftly from his seat. Two brooding figures in brown tattered cloaks stood at his doorway.
"Put that down before I get mad and break that hand of yours,"
one of the hooded figures said. As Martin tried to discern the recognizable voice, the figure removed his hood, revealing his face. Martin dropped the blade immediately and said in a quiet tone so no one would overhear him,
"My apologies, Your Highness."
Rugal and Garin stepped inside and closed the door behind them.
"What's with you, Martin? I have never before in my days seen you so paranoid."
He offered them a seat and explained,
"I have had a lot of customers coming to me since that dream everybody had. Some of them friendly enough, but some others were far more scary than people even round here I seen before. It's a little of my fault, I suppose. There was more demand for horses than I had supply, so I auctioned them off, indiscretion of course, but not everyone was too happy about the prospect. After most of the horses were gone, people started to fight over the remaining few and the guards had to come in and break it all up. They made me shut down my business entirely for a little while. Anyways, when the guards finally went back to their normal routine of patrolling other more wealthy areas of the city, I could open up again and had a couple more steeds to rent out, ones that had returned from the others. But as I said, not all were too happy about the supply and demand, so some of them got violent, fast. Few men broke in here trying to strong-arm me, but I chased them away, for now. Then just a few nights ago, someone stole a couple of me horses. Would have done away with more had I not heard the ruckus and gone out there to stop them. I fear trouble will befall many more the longer that tower remains,"
Rugal said.
"But you know why I'm here. Do you have any horses left?" I always keep a couple of my best hidden away from the lot around here. How long you expecting to be gone with them?" 5 days tops. I'll pay you in advance in case we're gone longer. We will need 2 horses, strong ones and fast ones, clean too." "Yeah, I hear ya. As I said, I have the best of my stock left, even raised them from young. They be my pride steeds, so you be sure to take care of them and get them back to me in one piece. And don't let them find their way back home like the others would. I fear any loose horse would be immediately stolen even in the city walls."
With their business concluded at Martin's, Rugal and Garin got their steeds, and with Martin's assistance, snuck out of the city. They rode west for a full day until they reached the great Magister Castle Layfire. Home of the kingdom's greatest Magister family, the Zorfins, Layfire was a castle built like a fortress. Standing atop a large hill, its high arched walls reached 80 feet up, the only entrance a massive metal gate laid heavy with spells to protect it, and eviscerate potential intruders. A silver bell hung from just outside the gate. Rugal removed his hood and rang it. Moments later, a tall slender man with raven hair pulled tightly back into a ponytail came to the gate. He asked who it was and Rugal said,
"It's Prince Rugal, and his companion Garin Lockhart. We're here to see Lady Iris."
The gatekeeper looked closely at Rugal and Garin, who had since removed his hood, then muttered an incantation and the gates began to open inward for them. Once inside, the gates shut and they dropped off their horses. The gatekeeper took the horses while Rugal and Garin moved forward briskly. They walked on through the courtyard's first 2 levels and stopped at the third, the entrance to the garden maze. The maze was set before the main building, and was covered thick with strong thorn vines entwined together and reaching about 12 feet up.
"Wait here for a moment so I can lead us through the shortcut, otherwise getting through will take us hours."
Rugal then took a couple steps inside and spoke loudly,
"Terrace for Kungar."
With the last phrase uttered, Garin could hear the vines in the maze shifting rapidly and moving about. It gave him goosebumps. After that, Rugal walked further into the maze when the sounds of it moving stopped and Garin followed right behind, his right hand cautiously placed on his sword. He kept an eye out for any suspicious movement, or any movement at all that wasn't their own. Their trip through the maze was short, but Garin had no idea how larger it was, so for all he knew the shortcut only saved them a few seconds. Regardless, he was glad to be out of the maze, and as they approached the castle's front doors he said,
"I am glad I'm not a magister, this stuff is too spooky for me."
Rugal knocked hard on the great doors to the main building, and seconds later they opened up to a beautiful woman with flowing scarlet hair, and full lips. She was garbed in a special dress that outlined her slender body with a good sense of seduction but also opened her up to move freely without strain from the clothes. Rugal stepped inside and said in a half-sarcastic tone, "Madam Madeline, how good to see you." She scoffed and said, "Likewise my prince." She then looked to Garin and said, "Garin Lockhart I presume." Garin bowed politely and said, "My lady." Madeline took another look over the two and asked, "And what is with those hideous cloaks? You two look like peasants in those things."
"That's the point,"
Rugal said.
"We are here in secret, in haste, so as polite as I may please retrieve Iris for me."
Madeline thought it over briefly and asked,
"Yes, you did send a letter saying you wanted to see her right away when you arrived. But may I know why you need to see her before I go retrieve her for you?"
Rugal stared her down coldly. He never liked Madeline, nor did she like him. He knew if he wasn't the prince she would have tried to kill him long ago. But he was the prince and she had no right to make demands of him or refuse his.
"No, you may not. And as I said before, we are in a hurry, so make haste."
Madeline went to stall more. She loved irritating Rugal whenever she could, since that was about all she could do given her position, when voice spoke out from behind her, half startling everyone.
"My prince, your visit is always a great pleasantry at our castle."
Rugal and Garin turned to look at him. He was a handsome man, appearing in his 40s wearing a trim silver robe. His hair was white as the snow outside and his eyes were a deep purple. Right away Garin recognized the man, Tara Zorfin, the kingdom's most powerful magister. Most believed it was Cambron, but that wasn't true. He was in line to the title of Grand Magister but turned the title down to be with his family at this castle. The Zorfin family name was carried over all the way from the great magic lands of Dorgal. Suddenly all the powerful magic around the castle, the gate and the maze all made sense to Garin. He hadn't known the prince's paramour was the Iris Zorfin. The young woman did well to hide her true identity and took more after her mother in terms of looks, and Garin never wanted to be rude and inquire about her family name.
"Tara, I'm so sorry for the sudden interruption."
Tara held his hand up, interrupting Rugal.
"No, it's all right, you are the prince, you may come and go here as you please. Iris is in her room studying, go see as you would. But please stay at least a day to rest properly, and let your horses rest, they must be exhausted too."
Rugal smiled and said,
"You're a very gracious host, we shall take you upon that offer, Tara."
Tara bowed lightly and said,
"It's my honor, prince."
Then with a dull flash of silver light he and Madeline vanished. Iris' door was a deep blue color with a dim luminescence to it. Rugal had removed his cloak and told Garin to do the same as he rolled it up and handed it to him. When their cloaks were off and behind Garin's back, Rugal knocked at the door. A moment later the door opened, revealing Iris behind it. She was very beautiful like her mother but had auburn hair and purple eyes like her father. She was in fit shape and wore a casual outfit of a long skirt and long-sleeved shirt.
"Rugal!"
Iris cheered and wrapped her arms around him as she went in for a kiss. Rugal did the same and they stood there kissing for a longer than Garin thought comfortable to be around. When they stopped, Iris turned to look at Garin and hugged him too.
"What are you two doing here?"
Iris asked, happy but surprised to see them.
"Actually, it's about a mission this time, may we come in?"
Rugal asked. Iris moved out of the doorway to let them in and shut it behind them. Her room was large with a feather bed in the center and the walls lined with bookshelves, all of them completely full. Most the books were for academic purposes but some for entertainment. She also had a couple large light blue desks, both stacked with scattered papers and ink bottles. Her walls had numerous paintings of mystical animals, such as a unicorn or a sea serpent. While Rugal and Iris took a seat on her bed to talk, Garin pulled up a chair from one of her desks to sit in. He put the rolled-up cloaks under the chair while Rugal spoke.
"Well, to be short and to the point, we are climbing the tower to obtain the wish for the kingdom." "Blah, that stupid thing, what need do you have of that wish? In a few short years, when I completed my magister training here, we can live together and we will have all we wished for already,"
Iris said, then she kissed Rugal some more. He pulled away early and let out a sigh, saying,
"Well, it's more than just that. Iris, the tower is siphoning the life from the land around its base. And every day it spreads a little further. We tried everything we could to destroy it, but our best weapons and magic couldn't even scratch it. If the tower remains, it might very well absorb all the life in this kingdom, perhaps this entire world. So we need to ascend the tower and obtain that wish to remove it. Or at the very least, find a way to destroy it from within. So Sir Thrain has been assembling a small team, including me and Garin, to ascend the tower. He's gotten most the members, people he knows and trusts, but we're still short a few others. Yes, I know all about the Devil Tower,
Iris said.
My father has been spending many sleepless nights poring over his older books in research of the tower. So far he has found nothing though, least to my knowledge. Well then it may be up to us to take care of things. Anyways, this trip could be very dangerous and I can understand if you don't want to go.
Iris scoffed and said,
and miss out on my best chance to go on an adventure unlike any before? I think not, and besides I'm a Zorfin, which means I'm superior to you knights in every way.
Rugal grabbed Iris' hands and said,
and I wouldn't have any better magician by my side than you, my love.
The two kissed some more until Garen cleared his throat loudly to remind them he was still there.
Well then, now that you're in,
Garen said.
We still need 2 more people that we can trust absolutely, but to be honest I don't know anyone more whom I can trust so well that isn't already joining us. How about you, Iris? Aside from my father, no, and he'd be too busy to join us anyways. Who else besides us and Thrain are going?
Rugal and Garen looked at each other then turned back to Iris.
Actually we don't know,
Rugal said.
I'm assuming Grand Magister Cambron and his former apprentice Vera, perhaps Thrain acquired the Ranger Adeline to join too, but after that I cannot say.
The 3 of them then spend the rest of the day catching up with their lives. Rugal had already told Iris about his life during his monthly secret visits, but Garen had not had a fair chance to speak with Iris about these things, so he caught her up to present day in his life and she told them of the new spells she discovered and had been mastering, along with a couple minor demonstrations outside. And as night came on to them, Garen found his guest room. Meanwhile Rugal and Iris spent a long passionate night together in her bedroom, as they had so many times before. The next morning after breakfast they were set to leave, donning their tattered cloaks once more. Iris meanwhile wore her battle dress, an enchanted set of clothes she designed herself. The dress was violet and blue with a dark green 7-star symbol embroidered onto the back, her family sigil. And sewn around the arms and legging of the dress were dark green lines overlapping one another and curving into arcs at the joints. The dress is designed to allow her to move completely free, much like her mother's dress. It also had protective spells woven into it, which served as her own personal armor. She designed it to nullify all known forms of magic, and reduce the sharpness of weapons and claws. Their trip back to the capital city took them 2 days, since they were no longer in such a large rush. They came in through the front gates very early morning, this time with their cloaks removed. Rugal and Iris went straight to the castle while Garen returned the horses. When Rugal and Garen returned to the castle, claiming Iris to be their next member of the company, Thrain was little more than upset. As it turns out, he had immediately changed his mind about the decision to ask Rugal and Garen to find another member, mere hours after he asked, but the 2 were long gone before he could take his decision back. They talked in his morning keep while Jezebel was out for a stroll in the gardens.
So what is it that you don't trust her or don't know her?
Rugal asked.
Both,
Thrain answered.
I understand that you know and trust her, Garen too, but it's her mother that's the biggest cause to worry about with her. Madeline Zorfin has not always had the kingdom's, or her daughter's, best interests at heart, and it's a well-known thing. How am I to know that Iris isn't accompanying us by order of her mother? Okay, first of all I am standing right here,
Iris said, joining into the middle of the argument.
Second, I am not a puppet of my mother, unlike my sisters. And lastly, I am here to aid, and be with, my lover during a dangerous mission. Rugal is to me more important than some dumb wish.
Thrain glared at the 2 then said,
Oh, now I get it, you 2 are fucking and can't bear to be out of one another's bed for more than a few months tops. Well, I am sorry to disappoint you both, but I will not jeopardize the success of this mission so you can play puppy love like some immature teenagers.
Swiftly Rugal backhand slapped Thrain across the face hard.
If you ever question the honor of my love again, then you best be prepared for the consequences. Because I will let no one, not you, not my father, not anyone question my love and its honor.
Rugal had his left hand placed firmly around the hilt of his sword, he was prepared for the worst. Thrain glared at him, and wiped the blood from his mouth, his lip had been cut during the slap.
Get out,
he said in command. Iris and Garen left immediately while Rugal lingered back a moment to stare Thrain down. His eyes saying more than words ever could in that moment. When they were a good distance away from the keep, Garen said,
You both took that a little far, you and Thrain I mean.
Rugal stopped and looked Garen into the eyes and said,
Some things there is no limit on the distance you can go. One day me and Iris intend to marry and I will not have anyone questioning our commitment to each other. Well then I think we can all agree to avoid Thrain for a couple more days until we leave to the Devil Tower.
At the same time Rugal and Iris said,
agreed.
On the morning they left for the tower. Rugal and Iris awoke and left before sunrise to leave ahead of them. Thrain decided that way was best to reduce suspicion from spying eyes. But the two knew he was still upset about what happened when they announced Iris would join them, and this was his way of keeping their distance for a little while longer. Garen and Thrain left a few hours later with Vera in their company. She had the most trouble getting ready and was a bit of a nervous mess. Garen helped calm her down, as well as help her finish packing, for he too was nervous, but more anxious about the tower. After she was packed, he managed to calm her down, and since she never mastered the art of riding a horse, she had saddled with Garen. The three of them had caught up with Rugal and Iris just as the sun was setting low. They made camp for the night and set out at break of dawn the next day. When they finally arrived at the base of the tower, they found a small encampment of a few others. 2 tents were pitched and a small fire was kindled with the people hovered around it eating. Rugal and Garen recognized right away the dark-haired ranger, Adeline, among the group, but had no idea who the smaller girl next to her was and the giant of a man across from them. Thrain rode up to them first and after a short word introduced everyone to Lessa, Adeline's apprentice ranger, and Kurth the adventurer. They all gathered around the campfire and shared a meal before they were to go into the tower. While they ate, Kurth entertained them with one of his adventures tales about how the boat he was on sank out on the ocean waters and he had to wrestle a shark trying to eat him. According to Kurth, he beat the shark into submission and rode it most of the way back to land, where he continued on as if it hadn't even happened. Of course, the tale sounded absolutely ridiculous and unbelievable, but stranger things have been known to happen. And Kurth did have a row of numerous bite marks on his leg where, in his story, the shark tried to eat him. His tale was thrilling and his accent added a pleasant sound to it. And when they finished eating they packed their things and set the horses loose to return to the kingdom. For now it was time to begin their ascent of the Devil Tower. Chapter 5 Irene the Sly, Chapter 1 The city of Anair, what was once the proud capital of the Cantor Kingdom, has degraded into a run-down habitat for the citizens too poor to afford a move into the great new capital city. As Cantor had for a long time been a poor kingdom, many of the homes and buildings of Anair were made with cheap and convenient materials, only a few noble houses or temples were made of good material like solid stone. Most the decent homes were made from an imble wood grown from local trees, while others were made from a simple ground clay, also local. The clay, though cheap to acquire and easy to use, didn't last very long and needed repairs to the homes or buildings it was made of every 14 or so years, or after a bad storm. A majority of the works in Anair at the time were repair builders for such buildings. They had a good influence of jobs until the kingdom came into a new fortune and wealth and abandoned the city and most of its people to build a new capital. The repair builders, having only one job, were now left with nothing, and so was their families. Mostly the rich, noble, or military families were able to migrate to the new city. Anair was left to rot, but with the hard work and dedication of a few great minds that stayed behind, and the repair builders, they managed to combine materials from all over the city into building it anew with 2 main districts. The district with all the builders and their families had become the structure district, while the others lived in the new slums which had been the other district. The old slums were made out of the same ground clay as many other buildings before in the other districts, but builders seldom went there for repairs as no one commissioned work but once a year. The buildings there were made to shelter a great number of people at once but were not comfortable at all. Somehow the city sewage system managed to be built through the old slums, making life there all the worse. As it were, the new slums had been migrated away from the old one and away from the rancid sewers, both by design and sympathy of the builders. The new life breathed into Anair felt like a blessing to the people who had to stay behind, and now the city was livable again and a good place once more. The king took notice of the new remolded city and decided to add more to it, to help it flourish. He sanctioned a 3rd district to be built into the city as an extension of it. The 3rd district was called the Sorcery District, with strong high walls erected around it as well as canals put between it and the Structure District. It was built well for defense, as the only way into that district, which was made for the kingdom magisters to have their own place entirely, was through the Structure District, and across the single wide bridge crossing the canals. At the end of the bridge was a great iron gate with several guards. Only magisters or special people with passes were allowed inside the district. Irene had been born in the time after the city had already been conjoined as 3 districts and knew only of its history from old tales her parents used to tell her before bed. She had been born a slum rat, as those in the other districts often referred to those living in the slums. Though the city now flourished more than ever, the people had been for the worse of it all, and no longer looked after one another as they had done in the past. Irene had lived with her parents in their small worn-down home until she was 6, where they died due to illness. She would have starved to death if not for the young boy she met named Elia. Elia was on the streets for just a little longer than she was, but he adapted and learned fast. His mother died giving birth to him, and his father joined the army some time ago, but was reported dead. Elia was a kind boy, light brown skin, and dark eyes. He smiled a lot and was always optimistic, despite all the despair in his life. Irene, however, had pale skin with freckles all over her face and orange hair. She was short for her age and her clothes didn't always fit right. The two had been living on the same pair of clothes for some time now, despite them being tattered, dirty, and smelly. Despite all the odds, the two survived 6 hard years in the slums with each other's help. They would steal food whenever they couldn't find any pockets to pick for a few coppers in the structure district. Irene had been a better thief, but Elia was taller and could run faster, which most days now is what it had come down to when they stole food or even picked pockets. People were finally onto them, so they had to either run with their spoils or take a harsh beating for them. Today Elia paid the price of only a black eye and some bruises for a stale loaf of bread. He got lucky today. As the two shared the bread inside an abandoned house, Elia looked out the cracked window and thought out loud,
I wonder what all the snow must look like from up above.
Irene shivered and hugged Elia tighter as he wrapped the large wool jacket over the two of them best he could.
If it's warmer up there than down here, who cares?
Irene said. While Irene had finished her half of the loaf already, Elia still had yet to take more than a few bites. He would often disappear into his own world when staring at the sky. Sometimes Irene wondered if he was really a magister who was leaving his body to enjoy a better world. For it seemed no matter how cold the winters, or hot the summers, Elia was unfazed by it all. So long as he could gaze into the sky he was content. His dream, he shared and spoke of often, was that one day he would fly up and away from all of this and never touch the ground again. He would look down upon the world as it had looked down upon him for most his life. Sometimes Elia's daydreams were contagious, and Irene often thought to herself what it would be like to just sprout wings and fly away to a new and better world. One where she would no longer have to struggle or suffer just to survive. Soon enough Elia snapped out of his daydream and ate his food. When he finished he said,
I heard news that the magisters claim that spring is coming upon us faster than normal and we won't have but a few more days of this snow.
Elia said.
It will be nice to step outside again in the warm air and not shiver myself to sleep now and again.
Irene said. Then she let out a big yawn and drifted off into sleep. She awoke some time later with the sun beaming on her face. Outside the winter she could see the clouds had long departed and the snow looked thinner than before. Elia was nowhere to be found, perhaps he was off getting them breakfast.
Irene, you have to come outside and see this, it's amazing,
Elia said, coming suddenly into the abandoned house. Outside it was cold and snow everywhere, but there was now winds blowing, so Irene was grateful for that. Elia had led her up to the roofs to see something. It was a dangerous trip up to the roofs, and one winter Elia had slipped and sprained his ankle so bad that he had to wait inside for weeks while Irene stole their meals for the winter. Normally she would handle the warm or hot days while Elia went through the rain or snow or storm, since he was stronger and could handle it better. Although she was a far better thief than he was, so she made it up to him by getting his favorite fruit on each trip, bananas. She meanwhile was more of an apple person and loved the green ones most. Irene struggled to get onto the roof and Elia grabbed her hand and pulled her up. He was very excited. He pointed out far off to the northwest and said,
Look, there it is.
Unbelieving to her eyes, there out in the distance, stood a dark tower rising high into the sky, higher than she could see.
What is that thing?
She asked.
I don't know, but it suddenly appeared overnight, I guess. It's the talk of the whole town. And what's better is I made quite a haul this morning while everyone was out and about talking of the mysterious tower.
Elia pulled out a small sack that was tied around his waist tightly. He opened it up and dumped out a small handful of silver coins onto his open palm. Irene's eyes went wide as she stared at them, sparkling in the sun.
Are these silver?
She asked, feeling this was all some sort of a dream. A large smile came across Elia's face as he said,
Yes, real silver coins. I snuck into many rich houses and found the silver just lying about in some of them. Now we can finally afford some real clothes and good fresh food.
Elia was more than thrilled, he was ecstatic. Irene and Elia moved quickly to get to the clothes store. If any of the houses were to notice the silver missing and suddenly the two of them stroll into the structure district with money, then they would in serious trouble, probably have a hand cut off for the crime. Picking pockets of someone on the street was one thing, but stealing from the rich, who can afford to seek better punishment, always seems to have more dire consequences, if caught. And so Irene knew that to get away with it all, that she would have to use everyone's amazement of the tower appearance to go on undetected. She knew if Elia was exaggerating, then it could be very dangerous for them, because two decently known thieves coming into such an amount of money so suddenly would be highly suspicious. But this was her first chance at good clothes in a while, and she was tired of nearly freezing to death every winter. They took the back road and Eli's best they could on their way to the clothes shop. Inside, the shopkeeper gave them some foul words for their smell but didn't cause any great commotion or trouble for them. They found the cheapest and best clothes they could that fit their size. They were nothing fancy, but they were much more practical, and made Irene and Elia look like normal kids instead of the slum rats they really were. The stolen silver coins got them enough for 2 entire outfits each. One was a heavy winter garb and boots, the other was for spring and summer. After buying the clothes, they went to a darker alleyway and quickly tossed aside their old rags of clothing and put on the new stuff, feeling warm for the first time in winter. With the new outfits purchased, they had 1 silver coin left, which was more than enough to fill their bellies with a hot meal for the first time in a long time. What few coppers they had left after the warm meal only lasted them a day, but it was another solid day without having to steal to survive. When they returned to their old routine, it was easier for them to go unnoticed, since now they dressed like other kids around them. Irene even joined in on their duo routines, which normally they only pulled during spring. One would distract the target, the other would make the grab. And for a time things continued on normally for them and everyone else. That is until the night where everyone had that strange dream about the Devil Tower. Elia was not same since then. He would be gone longer and come back later, sometimes with food, sometimes without. Whenever Irene asked him what he was doing when he was gone, and not stealing food, he would answer in with something obscure or very vague. It was like he didn't want Irene to know what he was up to. Finally, she couldn't take the secrets anymore and one day demanded to know what he was up to. He told her like it was not a big deal.
"Do you remember that dream about the Devil Tower?"
he asked her.
"Yes,"
Irene said, wondering where he was leading her.
"Well, ever since then I've been thinking, if I could climb to that tower I could make my wish come true, or more even. I could wish for the whole world and never again would I have to live as a slum rat. I could even wish for my parents to be alive and be the king and queen of Cantor if I wanted."
Irene went to say he was insane, but she hesitated in thought. Maybe he was onto something. If you could wish for anything, you could do more than any normal person. With that kind of power, you could have the world if you wanted. But none of that mattered if you didn't make it to the top of the tower, which surely a lot of strong people would be climbing and would kill any weakling who tried sneaking around them.
"Alright, let's say you do make it to the tower base, which is a very long and enduring trip. How will you climb it once inside? There will be many strong people gathered there who would probably kill you just to remove competition,"
Irene said.
"You are right, a normal person like me would have no chance of climbing that tower, unless of course I had enchanted tools and weapons to help me climb it." "What are you getting at?"
Irene inquired.
"The very thing I have been spending my time doing,"
Elia said excitingly.
"I have been gathering information and know of a way to get these magical tools and weapons." "Well, what is it?"
Irene asked, more curious than concerned about the idea.
"Inside the sorcery district are 2 temples, and one of them, the center temple, is where the mystic vault lies beneath Cantor's treasury of magical items. If I can just get into the vault and steal even a few of those great items, I would have all I need to climb the tower." "How are you supposed to even get into the sorcery district?" "The only way in is over the bridge, which has a well-guarded gate that only allows access to magisters. That is the most common and well-known way into the sorcery district, but not the only one,"
Elia corrected her.
"The old slums have many access areas into the sewers, and those sewers connect and come out into each district at some point, even the sorcery one. The sewers are not too complex either. I found my way down there easily and even got a torch to navigate them through the dark. Right now I only need one more crucial piece of information before I can get inside that vault. And I will be getting that tonight."
Irene was silent for a long while until she finally worked up the nerve to ask the question she had been holding back since near the start of the conversation.
"So let's say you do get into the vault and make it out in one piece too with all you need. Are you just going to leave me here by myself?"
Elia took her hands and looked her in the eyes and said,
"My dearest friend, this is a very dangerous thing I'm doing. I wouldn't dare risk your life in it all. But don't worry, I will see you before I go, and when I return, having my wish granted, I will take you out of the slums and we can live the life we were meant to have."
Elia then hugged her tightly. He left shortly after, saying he needed to get into position just before nightfall, otherwise he wouldn't get the information he needed. Irene tried to talk him out of it, but he was too stubborn and was gone before she knew it. Irene couldn't sleep, so she stayed up all night waiting for Elia, but he never came back. Sun began to rise and she grew too worried to sit around any longer and went out to search for him. She had a strange feeling she would find him in the sewers. If after all he got what he needed, then that's where he would go next to sneak into the sorcery district. Outside the wind was howling and the cold breeze cut through her like sharp razors, but she continued on regardless. The old slums had long since been abandoned and no one seemed to ever go there anymore, so when Irene found 3 sets of large footprints in the snow it worried her. She followed the footprints as they soon began to lead her to the sewers. Not much further ahead she saw what looked like something being dragged. Some spots of the snow had light trails of red on it, almost like blood. She tread her path more carefully, looking around her every 10 seconds to make sure she was alone. Irene was never the paranoid type of person, but for some reason right now she felt something deeply troubling would reveal itself to her any moment. As she got closer to the sewers she could hear loud voices coming from the underground entrance. She kept back, hidden safe behind a pile of rubble that might have once served as a small house, as she peered over to the sewer entrance to see 3 haggard men standing around a brown-skinned young man who was lying motionless in the street. Irene gasped loudly as she recognized the young man. It was Elia. Was he dead or just knocked out? Her mind raced for answers, and as the men grabbed his feet and started dragging him some more she couldn't stand back and wonder anymore. She leapt out of her hiding spot and rushed at them.
Elia!
She screamed with no sensible thought.
What have you done to him?
As soon as she got to the men she tried pulling their hands off Elia's ankles, but they only shoved her down as if she was made of paper. She got back up and went to see if Elia was all right. She shook him as hard as she could. The men just stood around, probably enjoying her misery. Eventually one of the men picked her up by the back of her coat and brought her to eye level. His breath was hot and reeked of odor as foul as the sewers.
Your little friend is dead,
the man said callously.
He was caught spying on us while we were discussing some very important stuff. Can't let a rat run around with that sort of info, he might go squeak to someone for a bit of cheese.
He laughed a little in his throat. Irene was in tears now, she couldn't believe it.
We gonna dump his body in the sewers, perhaps we shall throw you in there too, eh? Or maybe we can use you for something else.
He put a firm hand around her thigh and began rubbing up it slowly. Soon as he got too high Irene reeled her fist back and punched him in his crooked jaw hard as she could. He dropped her and was forced to step back. He wiped his face with his hand. There was a little blood from a cut lip. Irene stood up now, and soon as she did the man raised his right hand up and hit her hard across the face with the back of it. Even in the cold weather the blow was so hard that part of her face lost its numbness and now stung worse than before. She was knocked hard to the ground and the man turned to his 2 partners and said,
You get rid of that one, I'll deal with this one here.
As the other 2 men took Elia's corpse down into the sewers Irene knew there was nothing she could do, nothing except run away. So she rose to her feet, turned and fled, the man chasing swiftly after her. Though he was bigger and could outrun her, she was nimble and lighter. And in the unpacked snow, so, while he struggled to plow through it, she ran on top of it, soon escaping him in the snowstorm. The days that followed after Elia's death were extremely hard for Irene. Not only had she lost her best, and only, friend in the world, she was now being hunted by those 3 men from the sewer entrance. Avoiding them wasn't too hard on its own, but combined with stealing food or money for a day's meal it was near impossible. Before long she finally slipped up in the market and the men spotted her, making her go without food and almost catching her this time. She ran back to the old slums and lost them in the maze of allies that combined it with the new slums. She wouldn't be able to keep up like this, but how long would the men continue to search for her? As she sat her in small hovel, that was now completely empty of any feelings of a home with Elia gone, she began to contemplate her life and what it could become. Perhaps she could spend the rest of her life living as a rat, stealing to get by, but then what? The loneliness seemed too much for her to bear and she began to think about that promised wish at the top of the tower. Was it powerful enough to bring someone back from the dead, perhaps even more than just one person? Maybe Elia was onto something, maybe with that wish she could bring him back to life, bring their parents back to life too. And the more she thought of it the more she wanted it. At the passage to the underground sewers stood Irene, staring into the path she would need to infiltrate the sorcery district. Elia had said the sewers were simple to navigate and he had a torch planted somewhere just inside the underground entrance. She memorized his words carefully and could hear them even now, almost whispering in her ear, the center temple of the sorcery district, beneath it, the mystic vault. She didn't fully know what missing crucial piece of information Elia needed to infiltrate the vault, nor did she know where to find that information.
but she knew that she could no longer stand to be alone. She had to move forward if she ever wanted to see her friend again, and perhaps even her parents. Taking in a deep breath and letting it out, Irene moved forward into the underground sewers. Stealing from the common people was easy for her, but stealing from the very kingdom and magisters was unlike anything she ever thought about before. If it were even possible, she would find a way, risking everything to do so.